Hello, and welcome to Reflections on Gaming. In this podcast, we take a look at gaming in general, how you have fun with it, and pop culture at large whenever it's applicable.
That's right. Last week, we talked a little bit about our favorite games and why they are our favorites. And this week, we're going to talk about Death Stranding and what makes a game fun. Now, Jordan, I don't know that much about Death Stranding, to be honest, so I don't know, can you give me a little bit of background about it?
Sure, and of course I don't imagine that a lot of people are necessarily familiar with Death Stranding because it's a bit of a niche title. But suffice it to say that Death Stranding is a bit of a conflicting game. First, some groundwork. The creator, the big brain behind Death Stranding, is a man named Hideo Kojima. He is famous for the Metal Gear Solid franchise. And if you've never played those games, they are very unique.
Do it. Go play them right now. They're really good.
They're excellent. However, they're also really weird. And the storytelling in them is often very grandiose and very complicated, but not in a way that's hard to understand. Just if you know what a nanomachine is, you'll pretty much understand the majority of everything that's going on in them. But Hideo Kojima, a number of years ago, left the game company that he used to develop for. And after he left, he created his own game studio and started teasing out his new project. Everyone knew it was going to be something significantly different from the Metal Gear Solid franchise because, well, he didn't have access to the IP anymore. But no one knew what it was going to be. Over the course of several years, we were teased small trailers, clips every here and there. Very little was known about this game before it came out. And it was incredibly hyped. People were incredibly excited for this game, in spite of the fact that they knew almost nothing about it. And it's because Hideo Kojima is very well known as being an amazing game developer. Well, game comes out, and it turns out to be essentially what everyone has seen so far, which is a walking simulator in a very beautiful, expansive world that has a couple of other game systems rolled into it. But for the most part, yeah, like ladders, but for the most part, you really are just walking from area A to area B. Walking simulators, when it comes to video games, generally not highly regarded as anything more than a method of delivering a story.
Yeah, usually it's like, I don't know. I mean, when I think of walking simulator, I think indie, right? I think Dear Esther and Ethan. Gosh dang it, I don't remember the name of it.
The Vanishing of Ethan Carter.
Yeah, that one. There we go. Yeah,
I think Remains of Edith Finch. Everyone's Gone to the Rapture. There's a lot of walking simulators, but in general, people don't regard them as fun games.
Right.
They regard them as having really interesting stories that you can really delve into, because unlike a book or a TV series or a movie series, there are things that you can miss, like actually miss in the game. You can miss pieces of dialogue. You can miss interactable objects. There's a lot of things that you aren't necessarily going to have access to. Now, getting back to Death Stranding, when it came out and people realized, oh, this is almost nothing like Hideo Kojima's previous games, there was a bit of a backlash. People weren't necessarily super happy with the product that they were delivered. However, this past week, we learned that in spite of this, Death Stranding has been a commercial success. We don't have exact numbers, we don't have exact money account, but Hideo Kojima has gone on record saying that they have made back all the money that they spent on development, in addition to some capital gain, which has allowed them to fund their next endeavor. And so that's pretty impressive, and I want to get at a little bit of how that's possible, that this game that people were expecting more from or at least something different from, still manage to be an engaging enough experience for enough people to be a commercial success?
Yeah, I think anybody that's played it will probably, might have different answers to this question, but what did you find fun about Death Stranding?
That's an interesting question, because I'm not sure, for the most part, I found Death Stranding to be fun. I enjoyed the game. I enjoyed the time I spent with it, but I don't think I would call it a fun game. And that's kind of what I wanted to discuss today, using Death Stranding kind of as an example, is that while gaming in general is seen as something that needs to be fun to be viable, I don't think that's true. And I think there's a lot of things that we can discuss in how a video game can be engaging without necessarily being fun, and that can still be an experience that people seek after.
Interesting. Actually, yeah, I mean, not to instantly depart from Death Stranding, but I think Kojima's other games are indicative of this as well, especially Metal Gear Solid 3, I think of. It is very engaging, and there are parts of it that are fun, but a lot of the game is really, 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 really super duper slow, right? You're moving at a snail's pace through tall grass, literally just trying not to engage anybody ever, and you're trying to do that in all the Metal Gear Solids, but in Metal Gear Solid 3 especially, if you get seen, you're pretty much done for, assuming you're playing on, the anything above the easy difficulty. You're pretty much screwed if you get seen. And so a lot of the game is just not doing much. You're going in and out of menus, constantly changing your camo, healing your bullet wounds, because you actually have to do, the medkit stuff. You actually have to apply antiseptic and a bandage and a suture. So that's one of those things. I think of it and I love the game, but when I think back on it, there's only a few parts of it where I felt like I was really having fun, because a lot of it was just anxiety-ridden engagement more than anything that kept me entertained without it necessarily having elements I would think of as fun in a video game.
Right, and I think it's interesting. As I mentioned in our past podcast, I went to school for game design and development, and one of the ideologies behind game design is ensuring that you remain in scope for your project. With game development, it's really easy almost every time to overscope what you're doing. And so most of my professors and most of the gaming world at large, the solution to that dilemma is to ask yourself a question for everything that you want to put into your game. And that question is this fun? And I think that question doesn't really work anymore, because there's so many things that will benefit a gameplay experience without being quote-unquote fun. For example, last week we talked about our favorite games. I mentioned that I'm a big fan of Bloodborne, and we discussed that it's got a high barrier to entry because it's very difficult. I don't think there's anyone on this planet that is going to tell you that they got into that game and they have so much fun every time they get slaughtered by a monster. Right? There's no one who's going into this game and they're like, oh man, I can't wait until that thing tears my head off and I have to start 30 minutes previous to where I got. It's going to be so much fun.
Time. Yeah.
I can't wait to fight this boss 15 times over, and it just keeps killing me because I can't figure out how to take it on. Right? No one goes into the game for that. But if the game didn't have that fail state, if the game wasn't as difficult as it is and didn't lead to those frustrating interactions, would it be as fun or engaging as it is? And obviously the answer is no. If you have a game with zero fail states, you have to have something else in it to make it engaging. I think a good example of that would be the Lego games, right? In the Lego games, me and you were playing one recently, you can die right? But you respawn instantly. And the only punishment is you lose a couple of your money caps, right?
Yeah.
So if you play that game alone, how much fun is it?
Oh my gosh, they're terrible alone. Like,
Right.
yeah, they're not good. Well, I mean, they're good. They're just not very fun alone.
Right, it's because they have almost no tension. The game is very simple, so it's not like you have to have a high amount of skill to get through any of the stages of the game. You can almost get through just by pressing one button. You can't. You have to press 2 or 3 buttons, but that's about it. But the game gets a lot more interesting when you add in the fact that there's so many collectibles that you have to work harder to get. The fact that you can play with other people in both local and online multiplayer. Well, I think for the later ones.
Yeah, for some of them.
And that there's much more to the game than just pass, fail. And so thinking of a game as only being good if it's fun doesn't seem to be the way that we can look at games anymore.
Yeah, I think that actually, you were just telling me before we started this that you actually found an article talking about the 4 types of gamers that we mentioned in our last podcast, or that you kind of laid out in our last podcast. And I think that, the type of gamer you are is definitely impacts the enjoyment you get out of certain types of games. Like the Lego games, they're a completionist's dream. There's so many collectibles, and there's people who have lots of people to play with and enjoy playing with others. Really great game for them. But for people who enjoy a solo experience and enjoy like a story or a challenge, the game isn't going to appeal to them nearly as much as something like Bloodborne or Metal Gear Solid.
Yeah, and I think that we can look at Death Stranding as kind of a case study to lay out what makes things engaging, at least for my particular play style. And then we can look at how that applies to gaming as a whole, and maybe even other media, and how things can be far more engaging than we realize if we look at it through a different lens. So for example, Death Stranding, mentioned before, it is mostly a walking simulator. Truly, the majority of the game is you have a whole bunch of stuff that you have to stick on your back, and you have to walk from one area to the next. What makes that interesting is that you can take on more or less of a challenge depending on how many orders you decide to complete. So you can take on one order. It'll give you, 2 packages that you have to take 2 miles. And because it's so light, it's very easy for you to traverse. You have to think about almost nothing. You just walk from point A to point B. It's pretty uninteresting. It's pretty boring. But the game gets more interesting as you pile more cargo on your back. The reason being, Sam, the main character, as a human being, can only lift so much weight. So the more weight you put onto him, the slower he moves, the more stamina he uses when he's just walking around, the more his boots degrade, and the harder it is for him to keep his balance. Now, if you've never seen the massive towers of cargo that he can stick on his back, it is comical how many things you can stick on there.
Yeah, I've seen some gameplay of it.
You can literally have a stack of equipment that is twice his height just on his back, strapped down as he's walking through this frozen wasteland or a grassy plain or anything like that. Now, on top of just making it more interesting by having more things that you have to carry, more locations to go through, there's a balancing aspect to the game, and there's a terrain aspect to the game. Depending on the terrain you're on, just walking can be easier or harder, which, if you've ever played a game, sounds ridiculous, because usually the highest difficulty of walking is someone chopped your thumb off, and now you have to use a different finger to rotate the stick to move around in the world. Like, walking in a game is a no-brainer.
Yeah.
In Death Stranding, you have to maintain your balance manually at times. Not all the time. That would be
Really annoying.
crazy.
Yeah.
But when you're going up or down a hill, or if you're over a really craggy surface, Sam, the main character, can lose his balance, and you have to actively change some inputs to make sure he doesn't fall over. And you don't want him to fall over because A, he can get injured, and B, your cargo can get damaged. And if your cargo is damaged, it can get so bad that it disappears and you fail. And even if that doesn't happen, you'll be graded lower, because who likes it when your Amazon delivery shows up all dinged and scratched? Right?
Indeed. Gotta get that 2-day delivery perfect.
Yeah, no one likes it when their box is damaged. Even if everything on the inside is fine, it's still a little annoying when the box looks like it's been through a shredder.
So does the cargo serve some kind of story purpose, or is there like a monetary system that you can buy new things with?
So there's no money per se in the game. There are materials, and there is a overall limit to what you can produce in any given area, and by completing different tasks, you can increase what you're able to make, how much of it you're able to make, and you will increase the kind of supplies that you have access to. All of the things that you have access to are generally for improving your mobility. One of the coolest things that you can get fairly early on is an exoskeleton, which apparently actually exists in Japan, where it increases the worker's ability to lift things just by giving them additional support on their legs. And this exoskeleton is based on that, where as Sam walks around, if he has this exoskeleton on, suddenly he can, hold 200 kilograms instead of just 50 kilograms, which, lugging around 50 kilograms is still pretty impressive.
Yeah, wow. That's a lot.
But you can then keep doing deliveries to this particular engineer, and he will be able to develop better and better exoskeletons, which will allow you to increase the load you get. But the trade-off is that if you use this exoskeleton, there are fewer locations on your body that you can attach packages to, which makes it more difficult to balance yourself. On top of that, it's solar powered, so its energy can run out. And if you run out of energy and you've got 200 kilos on your back, you can imagine that Sam is going to have to stop.
Right, you're totally out of luck.
Right. Now, this is the majority of the game, but it doesn't encapsulate everything the game has to offer. There's a fairly expansive story, which will just suffice it to say it takes Sam across the country and involves a number of perils on top of just moving from point A to point B. But we don't really want to get too into that right now. But part of this...
Sorry, I assume that you've beaten this game, right? You've played it all the way through?
Yes, I have completed Death Stranding.
Okay, so I have a question that I think is pertinent. Why did you enjoy Death Stranding, but you don't like games like Animal Crossing? What's the difference for you?
That's a good question. I think part of it is stakes. In Death Stranding, you are introduced to the stakes very early on, and the stakes are literally the world is ending. And if you don't accomplish your goal, it's going to end. In Animal Crossing, there are no stakes. And that's what makes it enjoyable for a lot of people. They can do whatever they want at whatever pace they want, because there's no stress. I find that to be boring. If I don't have something to motivate me, if I don't have something pushing me forward, it's hard for me to stay engaged in something. Whenever I play Minecraft, which doesn't really have much of an end goal, I usually just start a new world, play for a couple of hours, and then I'm done. Because it doesn't have anything to push me forward. It's hard for me to stay motivated and going for some goal that I make up for myself.
Right, that makes sense. Yeah, and I think I have less of a problem with games that don't have that that kind of drive. Like, I really enjoyed Animal Crossing. I really like Stardew Valley, though that's not really the same because I played it with my wife. So, it's a little bit different to play something with somebody else when there's no stakes. But I think in general, I also feel that way. Is that, no, never mind. That's a lie, because I put over 1,000 hours into The Binding of Isaac Rebirth, even after, and I continue to play it, even though I've unlocked every single item and collected every single item and gotten every single achievement in the whole game. So, frankly, I don't even know. Though, obviously, Binding of Isaac has more fun gameplay, so I guess it's just different for every game, and some are going to appeal to some, and others are going to appeal to others.
Well, it does go back to a little bit what we said last time in regards to sometimes you'll create a game within a game, and it's not necessarily something you do consciously. It's something you do because it increases your enjoyment of something. And that's something that a lot of people do. Anyone with a completionist mindset does that automatically for just about any game. Any game they play, they go into, and it's not enough just for them to finish it. They want to get everything there is to out of it. For some people, that would be demoralizing and something that they hate. For other people, it's the only reason they like some of their favorite games. Some other reasons I like Death Stranding is that I found its story to be compelling and very engaging, and it also has some really high points in the gameplay that are just extremely exciting. Part of the story and part of the reason that the world is in this doomed state, the reason that Sam has to physically go from place to place, is because of this massive event that has occurred. This event is known as the Death Stranding, hence the name. This Death Stranding has resulted in a number of changes in the world as we know it. First of all, rain is no longer just rain. Now they refer to it as timefall, because anything that this rainwater touches immediately gains time. So if you were to go out and get caught in the rain, in a matter of minutes, you could go from being a 20-year-old to having the body of a 70 or a 90-year-old. So bad news for everything that gets caught in the rain. This also degrades everything that gets caught in the rain. It kills animals, it kills plants, it also grows plants. So people generally don't want to leave their bunkers. On top of this timefall, wherever this timefall is, there is a chance for BTs to show up. These BTs, otherwise known as beached things, which is just what they're called,
Okay.
are these invisible creatures that if they see you, they will hunt you down and drag you into essentially death. But it's not just death. If they catch you, they will create a void out event, which is essentially a massive thermonuclear explosion without the fallout. It erases a massive piece of land. And
Okay, wait. Okay. So you're saying rain now has the dimension of time within it that somehow transfers to people when it hits them. So anything that touches ages. And sometimes there are things that take you to a nuclear explosion around this rain. Is that right?
yes.
Okay, well, I don't know what kind of drugs Hideo Kojima is doing, but I do not want any. Please do not make me take any, because that sounds horrifying.
Yeah, it's definitely a very interesting creative process he has going on. But so because of this, almost every person in the world has agoraphobia. which, if you don't know, means that you have a fear of leaving your home or your immediate surroundings. So there's these cities that are all underground, and it's because people are terrified of leaving. So Sam is someone who, for whatever reason, not too afraid of leaving, and he carries packages from place to place, because if it was a drone, the drone could get caught in timefall, get rusted out in an instant, and then all the packages that it had would also be destroyed. There are certain materials that are immune to timefall, and that's how Sam is able to go around and not just die immediately anytime it rains. And there's also these things called BBs, which, when you connect to them, they allow you to kind of sort of see BTs and sense their presence when they're around.
Oh, the babies, the fetus things, right?
Yeah, so these are not insurmountable odds. They're just very difficult to deal with.
So is the timefall and the arrival of the BTs, are they random events or are they scripted events?
They are both.
Okay.
In the game, there are times where it will be a scripted event, which means that it will definitely occur based on some given parameters. In Death Stranding, those given parameters are either a mission that you have selected or an area of the map you happen to be in, but it will also randomly show up. So you have to always be wary of what's happening. Layer on top of these difficulties the fact that there are people who have gone mad, and all they want to do is deliver things. If you enter a certain region, they will literally hunt you down to steal your packages so that they can, quote unquote, deliver them. And by delivering them, they're really just taking them and transporting them between a couple of different areas, because that is how they cope with the world that they're living in.
So, okay. This sounds like much more than a walking simulator, gotta say.
It really isn't much more than a walking simulator. It's true that you do eventually pick up some weapon types, some non-lethal weapon types to take out other people, and some blood weapon types for taking on BTs, and that's a whole big thing, part of the story. But those are the peaks of the interest of the game. There are a couple of times where you can just go guns blazing and really have a lot of action in the game, but that's not the focus. The focus, which is very well highlighted by the soundtrack that Hideo Kojima added to the game, is very melancholic. It's a quiet, reflective kind of game, and it's mostly about forming connections with people and what those connections mean and how those connections can influence the world.
Interesting.
And I won't spoil the end, but that really is what this game is about, is those personal human-to-human connections, how we create them, and what they really mean in our lives. And what I think is amazing is that the game came out not too far behind this pandemic that we're currently dealing with, where a lot of people are having these sentiments of, I don't want to go outside because there's this fear of what could be there, and it's not something I could see, and it's something that could kill me or kill someone else, or at least do some harm to me. So it's interesting just how close that relates to something that we're actually dealing with, especially considering a lot of people thought that the story was a bit unrealistic. They're like, you're telling me that everyone would be too afraid to leave just because of this? It's like, well, for a lot less, we've got almost everyone afraid to leave, so I'd believe it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that is really interesting, the coronavirus, and that, considering, I don't know, well, maybe Kojima's drugs are just future glasses. Anywho, yeah, I think it's really interesting. You know, I think a lot of games and a lot of culture, right? A lot of pop culture just in general things that normally wouldn't be interesting are interesting because they have something to say. And you see that with all of Hideo Kojima's games. You know, Metal Gear Solid, I don't know if it started out, I assume he started out with this vision, but eventually, I mean, it has a lot of messages hidden, you know, within it. But at the end of the day, it's really like the cost of war and the point of war. And you know what I'm talking about. Anybody who's played the fourth game knows what I'm talking about, of like, you know, the people behind the war and what's the point of it all. I don't want to spoil anything because those games are great. If you haven't played them, play them, seriously. But I think, you know, that comes up a lot in pop cultures, and I think that, you know, does drive a lot of games to places where they wouldn't have gone, like Animal Crossing. You know, Animal Crossing can't live up to a game, in my opinion, can't live up to a game like Metal Gear Solid, or from what you've told me, Death Stranding, because it doesn't have anything to say, and it doesn't, you know, it's that walking simulator without a message.
Well, I think that that's an interesting take on media, is that having a message intrinsically makes it worth more. I think I would agree with that having some kind of message does increase the value of something, but it depends on the message. There was actually a game that came out maybe a couple of years ago. I did not play this game. I just saw a number of videos of people discussing it, analyzing it, breaking down all of the aspects of this game. And it's called Y2K. And the message of this game was supposed to be about a main character. A main character that is not a good person, and how he grows and how he learns to be a good person and what experiences he goes through to achieve this. However, that's not what happened in the game. What happened in the game is that this person's awful behavior was validated. And not only was it validated, it was shown to be very similar to the artist behind its own personality and own personal thoughts. And the game actually takes a little bit of inspiration from a real-world tragedy of a young woman who was abducted and killed. And most everyone who played the game or even heard about it was like, that's in very poor taste. That you just used this tragedy of this person losing their life to further your own personal ambition. And they did it in such a way that was really scummy, because this woman who was taken in real life is a kind of love interest for the main character. And one of the possible endings for this game is you meeting this woman in heaven and her thanking you for all these things that you did. So I think that game in of itself kind of proves that a message drastically alters the worth of a game. And I think most of the time it is for a benefit, but sometimes it is absolutely for a detriment. And it's amazing just how that can happen.
Yeah, I didn't know what game you were talking about, but I just Googled it while you were talking. And yes, I also remember hearing negative things about this, and I didn't get into it as much as you did. I didn't know that much about the controversy around it, but that's, yeah, really interesting when you take into consideration not only the message of the game, but the message of the game. Like, how did that message come about? Because it can drastically alter how you take the message when you learn about the circumstances surrounding that message. Which I'd be interested to understand. I'd be really, with that in mind, I'd just be really interested to know what has been Hideo Kojima's experiences in life that have led him to want to include the messages that he does in his games.
That would definitely be something very interesting to look into. That actually leads to something else that I have grown to see in the world, especially revolving around games. Actually, it's probably not so much about games, but just media in general. The longer amount of the longer you wait for a media source to age, the more it seems people think it is either good or bad. And that's a really poor way of putting it, but let me try to explain a little bit better. In high school, most people in the US will experience English classes where you are forced to read a book or a certain number of books from a very small selection of choices. And these books are all very old, right? I think the most recent one is over 100 years old. And people laud these books as being literary masterpieces. And as time goes by, they're like, we keep finding out more and more about how these things are just so amazing. But as far as I know, and granted I have not looked into this very deeply, books don't tend to be added to this list of literary masterpieces, in spite of the fact that people are still churning out amazing works of fiction and nonfiction. The reason I think for that is because once our culture as a whole has decided that something is good, there are people that will investigate why something is good. And they'll research it so intently to validate the idea that it is good that they will find all these different arguments, all these different supporting evidences as to why it's amazing. And then when you compare this to something more recent, more modern, that doesn't have that amount of analysis, it's like, how can you possibly compare them? This is so much better. Look at all these things that have been done on it, and then you just got the book over there that you think is good. Like, there's no comparison. I've actually seen that happen with games, which are significantly younger than literature, but the same thing has happened where people take these older games. One game in particular that I've seen this happen to is The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time.
I was literally thinking the exact same thing.
People have idolized this game to such an extent that there are new videos, new pieces of content from creators being made on it to prove how good it is, even today. A couple of years ago, or perhaps it was just a few months ago, it's been a while, there was a video that came out that was very well produced, very well thought out, and it was in a style that I very much enjoyed, but it felt very pretentious, and it felt like it was going a little too far in its thought process, in that this person was explaining that a lot of the story elements and a lot of the visual elements that you see in the game can be taken directly from certain pieces of the director's life from when he was a child. And they said that this person intentionally made all these allusions to these things that he loved as a child and made all these connections and this and that and the other thing. And they're like, can you imagine the thought process that must have gone into this person's head and this development team to make all of these connections and to create this immersive story and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, or it could just be that this person was influenced by these things early on in life, and because of those influences, they seep into his work. Now, I can't say for certain one way or the other, but I can say that as time goes on, people seem to lean more towards pieces being deliberately brilliant and people just having this neurotic ability to create inferences and allusions to things in their lives and literature and history and other games that I just don't think that's what's happening. I think what's happening is that people are influenced, and those influences inevitably enter into their mind when they're creating things, and of no particular intention of their own, they make these offhanded relations. And then later on, people connect the dots and assume that it was intentional, and not just intentional, but meticulously intentional.
Yeah, I think that definitely, going back to the literature thing, I think that happens a lot with like, people try to interpret the themes of books of like, what does this really mean? And a lot of, I mean, I can't speak for every author, but I know that I've heard stories, anecdotes of certain authors being asked like, well, why did you do this? And what does this mean? Like, where did you get this from? And they're like, I came up with it. I thought it was cool. I thought it was cool. That's why it's in the book. Next question, please. Where it doesn't really have a deeper meaning, nor does it have a deep connection to them. It was just a creative idea that they came up with that may have been influenced by something, but it absolutely was not a conscious connection that they made. I think that definitely happens in all art forms, of people looking a little bit beyond the mark as to why things are the way they are and why the creator did things the way they did them.
And I don't think that makes something worse. The fact that it is as good as it is isn't impeded on because they didn't mean for it to do that. It just happened to do it. But I do think that it makes it more difficult to discuss an art form when people take something that has been so immaculate is not the word I'm looking for, so critically inspected, that when something new enters that world, it's really hard to make a comparison without people being like, how could you possibly compare this newfangled thing to this masterpiece? Which, by the way, I do not like the term masterpiece. I do not believe in masterpieces, and I think calling something a masterpiece reduces anyone's ability to discuss it.
Yeah, that's true. I think it definitely, you come, again, Ocarina of Time, great example. The infallibility of that game is mind-boggling, considering the fact that pretty much every game that came after it has improved upon it in some way. Like, paving the path for progress does not make something a masterpiece. It makes it a stepping stone to greater things.
Right, and just because something is good, because, I still like Ocarina of Time. It's still a fun game, and I enjoy it whenever I play it. But there's flaws with it. Not just nowadays looking back at it, but when it came out, there was issues with it. Just take Hyrule Field, for anyone who isn't in the know. This is the center part of the map that connects all the other zones you go to do everything that you do in the game. This area has literally nothing in it. It is just there to connect the different areas, and it's massive. It is so big that when you first enter it and they tell you, oh, just follow this path to get to your next destination, it takes long enough that you can't enter the location when you get there. This is poor game design.
Yeah, that's like the most annoying thing about that game, is having to wait the first night to get into Hyrule Castle Town.
Right. It's very annoying. There is no defense of this other than maybe saying, well, they wanted to show that enemies pop up at night. It's like, sure, but why do enemies pop up at night? Why is that important to know? Why is there a day-night cycle? Like, there's a lot of things that don't necessarily make the game bad, but are not good parts of it. And the fact that people just skate over those pieces and don't talk about them or try to defend them, to the last, is silly.
Yeah, I think a more recent example from the same series, as we mentioned last week, is Breath of the Wild. In particular, my like main grievance, and maybe this is silly, but my main grievance with that game is the fact that it rains, because rain literally adds nothing and is just annoying. Like, lightning storms, cool, keep it. But rain, and okay, rain, keep it, but don't make it so that I can barely climb anything. The The punishment for rain when climbing is just absurd. And it's like, there are some things that you just have to climb, and if you happen to climb at the wrong time and it starts raining, you're just screwed, and you either have to wait, make a fire and wait for the rain to stop, or just meticulously try to find a path that works with your stamina meter up this thing that you have to climb. It's stupid. I don't like it, and I don't think there's a solid justification for the way that it was implemented into Breath of the Wild. And I just don't see it come up that much. Like, if anybody talks about it, it's in passing and not like it's a real problem with the game, even though I think it is.
That, or they talk about how it raises the skill ceiling, which is another thing we can talk about. But I think we could spend a very long time talking about Breath of the Wild, the good pieces, the bad pieces, and why people are so remiss to discuss the bad pieces or even acknowledge the bad pieces. But I think we have strayed from the topic at hand, and I want to get back to it before we finish. And that is, what makes a game fun? Or even more broadly, what makes media engaging? Why do people enjoy watching TV or a movie or read a book or read a comic book? Why do I like to play video games more than I like to watch TV or watch a movie? Why do other people enjoy reading books more than these other things? I don't think we can address all of these questions, but I think these are all questions that we should sometimes ask ourselves, because I think by dissecting the media we enjoy and figuring out why we enjoy it, it can help us enjoy it even more. And it can help us learn a little bit about ourselves, and that's always a good thing.
Yeah, if I can throw out one last thought about that in particular, I think at the end of the day, obviously we know why we enjoy things. It's biology, right? I think especially it comes down to accomplishment. Is that when you feel a sense of accomplishment, your brain gives you all those happy juices, and you get that especially in video games where you personally are accomplishing something. You're not just watching somebody accomplish something in a movie. You're not reading about somebody else accomplishing something in a book. You are personally accomplishing something with your own skill, which is why things like QuickTime events are so often lauded as lazy game design, and negatively, is because they aren't engaging and they're not fun, because you're not accomplishing anything by pushing a button when it tells you to push a button. You're accomplishing something when you think for yourself and accomplish goals that are either set out by the game or set out by yourself within things like walking simulators and Animal Crossing and sandboxes and the such.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you bring up QuickTime events. For people who are unfamiliar with a QuickTime event, a QuickTime event is something in the game where you have to either input a specific button sequence, or you have to move the direction of your analog stick in specific directions to accomplish something in the game that is otherwise not possible. For example, one QuickTime event that is very well known is a knife fight from Resident Evil 4. In Resident Evil 4, you can shoot with your guns and you can swipe with your knife, and that's it. In this QuickTime event, you have to hit a certain combination of buttons at the right time to go through this action-packed, really cool-looking knife fight that would not be possible with the regular actions of the game. If you fail, you die in a gruesome manner. If you succeed, then you just go through a cutscene. Now, the reason I think it's interesting that you bring up QuickTime events is because while in general they're not seen as a good thing, sometimes they're amazing. There's a game called Ashura's Wrath, and probably 50 to 60% of the game is just QuickTime events, and that game is fantastic. It's incredibly engaging and fun, and it's because the QuickTime events are done much differently than in other games. In almost every case, QuickTime events do not immediately kill you if you fail them. They just modify your score at the end of the level, and exactly what animations happen afterwards. If you nail the thing, then you get this super cool looking thing. If you don't quite nail it, then you still succeed, but it's not quite as cool looking. If you fail, well, you get dinged for it, but it doesn't just pull you out of the experience. And I think that is part of what makes something engaging. It's not just about what you like personally, it's also how something is implemented. I mean, there's lots and lots of games out there that are part of the same genre, but some of them are good and some of them are bad. And it's not so much because your specific taste is being catered to or not being catered to, but just they're literally, this one is better than this one because of the way things have been implemented.
Right. Yeah, I think that makes sense. And just right now, I'll plug, if any of you listening have any thoughts about what we've talked about today, or tangential thoughts about what we've talked today, or anything that we've talked about in podcasts in the past or in the future as you listen to them, please, let us know. Reflect on gaming with us. You can send us an email at reflectionsongaming@gmail.com, or if the platform you're watching this or listening to this on allows for them, you can leave a comment down below, and we'll read them, and you never know what might happen after we've read them.
Yeah, so I think in the end, what makes something engaging, probably we could spend a number of hours discussing the different types of players that there are and how different games cater to them, and that might be fun. I don't think we're gonna get to it this time.
Yeah, no.
But I do think that it's a very interesting question of like, why is it that I don't like Animal Crossing, but I do like a far more another game very similar that you don't do too much. And, we already discussed that one reason is because one is more engaging. One forces you to be engaged more. But at the same time, why is it that I like to be pushed? Why is it that I like to be given a task as opposed to being able to do whatever I want? There's a lot of games that I don't like because they give you the freedom to do anything you want, especially online games or online multiplayer servers where you can do whatever you want and that's how you have your fun, tend to not be quite as engaging for me. I think one great example is Grand Theft Auto 5. Grand Theft Auto 5, for so many people, just an incredible amount of people, is the greatest game ever made. And I have attempted to play it a number of times, and it just gets boring for me. And, a lot of people I see that play it really like it because in the game, you can pull out a gun or a knife or a crowbar or just your fists, and you can beat up random people in the street. You can steal cars from them and go as fast as you want. You can gun down the police. You can buy a prostitute and then pay them or not pay them and steal from them. There's so many things you can do. Most of them not great things in the grand scheme of things. But I played games where you're not necessarily a nice person. I just finished playing through The Last of Us, and Joel, the main character, is a monster. He is not a good person. He kills people in a brutal fashion just to do what he wants to do, to live the life that he wants. But I love The Last of Us. It's a great game. Cannot get into Grand Theft Auto. And I think I'd have to think and really research exactly why I dislike Grand Theft Auto so much. But I honestly cannot fathom why so many people love that game.
Yeah, I mean, the same. I also feel this way about Grand Theft Auto. There's a YouTube channel that I really enjoy. Not a sponsor, but his name is Doug, and he does a lot of things in Grand Theft Auto 5 where he messes with the controls, and he'll play golf with a boat, or he'll try to drive to the top of Mount Chiliad while planes are bombarding him and using only voice commands. And I enjoy watching other people do that because I like their person. I think it's funny. but I would never, ever, ever, ever in a million years actually want to do that myself, because I think I would be bored doing it. And I've tried picking up Grand Theft Auto 5 and I always get bored, like instantly. Trying to do anything, I'm just like, well, I drove a car for a little bit, I flew a plane for a little bit, and I think I'm gonna go play Skyrim now, or I'm gonna go play Binding of Isaac now.
And I don't think that we're trying to say that, oh, we're more cultured than people who like Grand Theft Auto 5.
Oh, no.
It's just interesting to see that even something so universally praised can be so disinteresting to some people. And like, why is that? What is it that this game caters to that is not something that we enjoy? In talking about the different player types in our last podcast, you had the killers, the socializers, the explorers, and the achievers, and everyone more or less fits into some spot in the spectrum there. And I think it's fairly clear to say that you and I are not killers. We're not much into competing with other random people and being able to say, oh, I dominated you. And I think that might be one of the reasons why we tend to have a similar interest in a lot of games. And that's because killers are one of the main audiences that a lot of game design companies are catering to right now. You've got Destiny with its PvP zones. You've got Grand Theft Auto Online, where you have to interact with other people.
Fortnite.
You've got Fortnite. You've got Apex Legends. Number of years ago, when Modern Warfare was really the big game on the scene, it wasn't the single player that people were generally talking about. It was the multiplayer and how everyone was playing those games. And while you and I played them, we almost never played them online. In fact, I think I played 1 or 2 matches online and did not enjoy them. And if I wasn't playing with someone I knew, like on the couch next to me, I didn't want to play the game. And it's because we just don't enjoy dominating someone else. And I'm sure there's more to it than that, because I love dominating you and some of my friends. But random people online,
we're just going
not
to
so
skim
much.
over the way you said that, but that's okay.
I think it's fairly clear that's not what I meant.
Anyway, I agree. I really like playing competitively with people I know, but it's because I'm not really, I don't know, like, I'm trying to win, but if I don't win, I don't really care, because everyone's enjoying themselves, and like, it makes way for, inside jokes, and everybody's just laughing. Whereas playing online, it's like, no, I don't really like any of these people. Pretty much everybody actually talking on the chat is annoying, and I don't want to hear from them, and I mute them anyway. It's just like...
Yeah, talk about the most annoying people on the planet. Yeah,
exactly. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, obviously, there's a lot more we could maybe talk about in the future, but I think we've gone far enough off of Death Stranding that maybe we can reserve further discussion for another day.
Yeah, I definitely like to hear other people's opinions on the subject of what makes something engaging to them, and especially if they think they know why that is, because there's so much that we could discuss just on that topic and specific games. I think it'd be really fun to go over some of the most interesting games generally, and most interesting games we enjoy, and kind of dissecting why that is for them.
Yeah.
But that'll have to be for another day.
Yeah, I think so. Well, thank you everybody who's tuned in for listening. And again, please, like Jordan just said, please, any thoughts, please reach out to us. We will read all of them, and we would really love to hear from everybody.
Well, we hope you've enjoyed this podcast for Reflections on Gaming, and we hope you join us next time. Until then, hope you have a nice week.
Bye.